Hi, all. This is Meg Alexander with Power to Fly. I'm going to be joined in conversation today by the absolutely staggeringly amazing Catarina Rivera. Now, before I introduce you to her, I just want to say thank you so much for coming to today's session. We are so happy to have you. Now, Katarina is a disability speaker, a DEI consultant, as well as a content creator. You might have seen her TEDx talk previously, but Katarina, I want to know about you. What would you like our audience to know about you today as we dive into this session?
Well, I would love everyone to know that I come to disability through my personal experience. I've been disabled my whole life, and I've worn hearing aids from a very young age. And I also have a progressive vision condition, which means that I'm blind and I still have some usable vision. So I use a white cane. And I just really come to this work through my passion, my personal experience. And I think that we really just don't see enough representation as well of diversity within disability. So I bring my Latina culture and background as well.
I think that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And you're right, it really is important to bring all of yourself to these things. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. Now, I cannot wait to talk a little bit more about, disability inclusion in the workplace. But I want to start us off. You had said that societal perspectives need to shift away from viewing disabled people as broken or faulty and towards viewing disabled people as part of the natural diversity of humankind. Can you explain a little bit about what you mean by this?
Definitely. And I think a great place to start in terms of framing the different ways that we talk about disability is going over some of the models of disability. So most people are familiar with the medical model, where people are diagnosed with something and disabled people are viewed as individuals with a problem that needs to be fixed by the medical community. We need a cure, we need treatment, and it's very much focused on the medical community having the answers. It's not focused on community building, it's not focused on living well with disability. There's not a lot of room for nuance and positivity in that model, and just as well the message of what having a disability means. So many people are diagnosed and not even alerted to the fact that what they have is classified as a disability, and that there are resources out there, there are other people out there that can share this experience with you. Now, another very common model is the charity model, where people are really telling very negative narratives about disability. People with disabilities are to be pitied. We have to feel sorry for them. We need to raise money for a cure. We need to help them. And all the people doing the charity work are positioned as saviors. So both of these models I find to be very harmful, but they are common in our society and everyone is influenced by them. The model that I love, and where this statement really comes from, the fact that disability is part of the natural diversity of humankind, is the social model, where it says, hey, there's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with disabled people, and we deserve to have inclusion in our world. We deserve accessibility. If I was able to access a ramp every single time that I was going to go into a building, my blindness will be less of an issue. If places were well lit when I was attending an event or a conference, if there was captions everywhere for every piece of entertainment on a plane that I want to watch, me being someone who is hard of hearing, I would have less barriers. So it's not really about the disability, although I do want to say that there are disabled people that have very complicated relationships to their disability identity. Not everyone is waving the disability pride flag and saying, I love my disability. There are challenges that come from the world, and there are challenges that come from disability, especially if you have struggled with like chronic pain or ongoing symptoms, and that's very real. But what we don't need are is the ableism that we find in our world, and the lack of willingness to make inclusion happen, where we see problems that have been going on for decades and we haven't made enough progress.
I really appreciate you calling out the different perspectives that people bring to this table, because you're right. You know, a lot of that model of being within the medical community is about fixing, even if it's not something that makes somebody lesser than. It's not something that necessarily needs to be fixed, if that's what you want to call it. So thank you for kind of diving in deeper on that with us. When it comes to a company and that lack of awareness, right, of what disability can look like, not only is that pervasive throughout, you know, the societal structures we live in, but also when it comes to organizational structures too. If a company doesn't really understand about what disability can look like, what are the impacts of that to its employees, its customers? You know, what do you think the company's responsibility is when it comes to that disability awareness?
Well, there are so many issues, and this is really common. Like, this is happening now, where companies have not instituted any training about disability awareness, where they have employees that are interacting with the public that are committing microaggressions against disabled people, or are not really resourced. They might want to do something well, but they don't have the resources or the training for how to provide an inclusive experience and respond in the moment when they encounter a disabled customer. So that really excludes disabled people. And if you want to talk about the business case, yes, you're losing out on a huge market, but I really try not to focus on that, because that shouldn't be the reason that companies do the work. Companies should want to serve their customers. They should want to make a positive impact on the world and really commit to their diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility goals. But let's talk about within a company. For the employees within a company, when the company has not focused on disability inclusion, there are many challenges that arise. A disabled employee will most likely feel unsafe or not want to disclose their disability. And what ends up happening is that person is doing their job and then is overworking to adapt to the inaccessibility that they're encountering. And also they're expending energy in the hiding process. And that is, of course, if they can hide their disability. Only 21% of disabled employees disclose their disabilities to HR. So this is a real issue. And what is happening is that companies are losing the talent. If your employees, all of them were thriving, you're going to have a better result. You're going to have a better company culture, as well as better deliverables, better products. Everything that you're doing will be at a higher level if your people are thriving. The other side of it, with not understanding disability, one thing that I want to call out is that there are companies that will design and engineer solutions for problems that people don't actually have, because you're not understanding or bringing in the disability lived experience, bringing in the experts from the community. We have seen things come out like a wheelchair that can climb stairs, where the disabled community responded and said, that is not what I want. I don't want the stairs to be there. You're talking about an environmental built environment that could have been made more accessible. And now you have a very expensive piece of equipment that also kind of looks dangerous to people, solving a problem that people didn't have. So when we talk about disability awareness and inclusion in the workplace, it impacts employees, it impacts customers, it impacts the company's results. And in terms of the responsibility, I believe that every company has the responsibility to not harm its employees, not harm its customers, and to really consider the impact of their actions on the world. So I believe it's every company's responsibility to do a good job with diversity and, of course, what we're talking about today, disability, inclusion, and accessibility.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, let's say if you've got an American company that's trying to expand overseas, they're not going to hire people that don't speak the language of the people in the country where they're moving into, right? So it makes kind of the same amount of sense that the idea of, like you said, the idea of a chair that can climb stairs, okay, it sounds cool in theory, but like there's a lot easier ways to do to get the end result, right? That don't put the labor on the people that need the support. Don't put the onus on people who, never mind the healthcare system in this country, would have to pay a lot of money to be able to utilize that, that seemingly problem-solving equipment that might not really do what they want to do anyway. So companies really don't really have to do any extra work than what they normally would do. You just have to keep in mind this other population that has been there the whole time. They needed this kind of service, but maybe you haven't thought about it till now. So I think that's really important to know. If we're talking about a remote workplace, as has become very, very common for a lot of people now, what do you think inclusion looks like in that virtual or digital capacity?
In terms of digital inclusion and providing a really great environment for remote work in this new context or even hybrid work, a lot of people might think that you have to do complicated technology or you have to get software to be inclusive for disability. But that's not the case. There's so many simple best practices for digital accessibility and inclusion. So I talk about things like sending out meeting agendas in advance so everyone knows what's happening. People who are hard of hearing can follow the conversation more easily. People who need more processing time can have that and come more prepared. These are examples. That's an example of a low-tech thing that anyone can do and make a standard practice. Now, the next thing with meetings, always enabling closed captions, making sure that is available for everyone and providing different ways for people to participate. Because a lot of managers and leaders will say things like, just jump in. And they think they're creating such a casual, welcoming environment, but that's actually not welcoming because there are many people who are not going to feel comfortable to jump in. The ones who are jumping in are the ones with privilege. The ones who are feeling like, oh, yes, I need to talk. My voice needs to be heard. And there are people that have experienced challenges in the workplace that have been told their voice is not valuable. And then for disabled people, for me specifically, I'm hard of hearing. I've had so many times where I have started talking and kind of not realized that someone else was talking. And it took a delayed reaction for me to realize that. So I don't want to be seen as someone who's interrupting. And that leads me to hang back and wait until the very end. And sometimes I miss my opportunity in a just jump in situation. So I always talk about flexibility in terms of different ways for people to participate, whether that's using the chat box or raise hand function or allowing people to email ideas after. So after a meeting, send meeting notes, have a clear summary that goes out. These are some simple things within the meeting structure that can be implemented. The other things to pay attention to are color contrast, font selection. Are the materials that you're putting together readable? Because they need to be readable for the virtual setting. If you're sending out any videos, do the videos have captions? Do they have transcripts? These are the types of best practices that are really important for companies to learn. They're out there. They've already been identified. So any company can get better in this area.
I think that's a really, really interesting point you make, that people aren't thinking of these things, and that kind of leads us into our next question here. A lot of people had talked about considering accessibility from the start of designing a product or an internal process and how that can lead to a much more accessible product or process than compared to a development that might only make tweaks at the end, at the end result of, of assembling or of designing. When I was thinking about this, I kind of thought the idea came to mind about planning a party and you're planning the menu and everything's great. And then you realize, oh, there's going to be vegetarian people there. So like, maybe we'll add a salad that'll be good for them. And so that kind of reminded me of the same, like last minute, not a priority, something that you sort of tack on at the end just because you might have just remembered. So when you are talking to people or are looking at, products that are being designed for accessibility purposes, why do you think it matters so much whether they are involving people from the start, like involving the disabled people that they are looking to help, versus not involving them until the end of the end of the process?
This is foundational to accessible design. So this idea of starting with accessibility in mind from the beginning is not unique to me. Everyone is out there talking about it in this field, but we don't see it implemented widely as an industry standard or across everyone who's designing products, whether they're physical products or events like you've just described, or digital products. So in terms of why this is so important to design with accessibility in mind from the beginning, it's basically more expensive and more time consuming to add in accessibility later. And you're not going to do as good of a job at it because you've already made key decisions that you cannot go back on, basically, without spending a lot of money or redoing everything. So whatever you do add on is not often enough to truly create an accessible product or event or whatever it is. The other thing that happens is that you lose the opportunity for innovation. Because if you're designing with accessibility in mind from the beginning, you're going to talk to more types of people. You're going to involve more diverse testers, and that will include the disability community and people with different kinds of disabilities. And those user insights will lead to a better product because you are going to be just spurred to design more innovatively. And you have the time to do that in the beginning because you have not locked in those key decisions. It's very important to bring that in. I'll give you a real example that happened in the world. The app Clubhouse came out as an audio-only app and was met with criticism from the hard of hearing and the deaf community because we could not participate 100%. There was a disability advocacy group on there called the 15% Club that was always dialoguing and trying to see, providing feedback regularly on what Clubhouse could do to be more accessible. It took a very, very long time for Captions to be on the platform. And imagine if they had included that from the beginning and they had said, oh, okay, we're going to have users of all different types. How can we provide features in the beginning? They would have saved a lot of time. And that just happens in many, many cases. There are so many times, for example, with conferences. A conference could get all the way to the point of accepting registrations and finding out they're going to have people who are wanting closed caption, who benefit from ASL interpreters. And if they haven't prepped that ahead of time into the design of the conference, then the experience is just not going to be as good and people are left out. And sometimes we don't see that negative impact. We don't understand because people just don't come to the event or they're not using the app, but it is a very real cost. So I hope that all designers and anybody who's making websites, making products, making events really learns about accessibility and makes that a part of what they do and integrates the best practices.
I think that's really smart to highlight that not only does it make for a less expensive development process, or have you get to avoid those can be very costly changes that you want to make on the back end. But you're right in that your statement about how people are trying to utilize those accessibility services and they're either not functioning or not functioning enough for what they need. You're very unlikely to speak up about that, especially if it already feels like your accommodations were an afterthought. So it makes a ton of sense why you want to be more proactive on that, and be more proactive and get that input, valuable input from the people in the community before you expend a bunch of time and energy on developing something that might not even really suit what the issue is. All right, one of the things that we want to talk about, because you had said that people that don't either live with a disability or have little experience with it might not really have a clear picture of what it looks like to live with a disability. If you were to think about some of the more common forms of ableism that you've seen in the workplace, are there any that really stand out to you? Something that you feel like a lot of disabled people experience, and how do you think that those can be eliminated?
This is such a great question. And before I get into this question, I did want to say for the previous question that accessibility creates a better product for everyone. And that's so important to recognize that you're not just accommodating or creating an inclusive environment for disabled people. everyone starts using those accessibility features. So there are, for example, on social media, tons of people watch content with their sound off for many reasons. Yes, I see. Okay, you too. So captions are helpful and you actually reach more people. So that's just something to know, that no matter what you're doing in the design process, accessibility is not something that is going to detract from your success. It's going to add to your success, and way more users than you are designing for are actually going to be using that feature. So now that we've gotten that settled, because that's so important, let's talk about your question with ableism in the workplace and what those common forms are. In terms of the workplace, we see a few common things that happen. First of all, a lot of people experience discrimination in hiring. They might disclose their disability in the interview, and then they never hear back. And it's very hard to prove discrimination. They might have an apparent disability that they cannot hide, and they're interviewing for a job, and they're not getting offered a job. So this is happening to many disabled people, where they want to be in the workforce, they're not getting the opportunities. This is such a huge issue, and the way that this can really be worked on is to intentionally create an inclusive hiring process and really look for ways to eliminate bias. So there are so many best practices with hiring. I don't have time to get into all of them, but if you want to get better at bringing in disabled people into your company, you have to address the hiring process. You have to provide people with other ways of showcasing their talents. Like give people actual projects to do. Look at their results. Don't assume what someone can or can't do. Another area where we see a lot of issues are the accommodations process, which is the minimum. People should be receiving the accommodations they're requesting, but oftentimes employers are denying accommodations, are giving people a hard time, or creating a process that's not really supportive for the disabled employees. And we have to remember that as accommodations are the minimum, that is not even reaching everyone who can benefit from support. But at the minimum, let's do a good job with accommodations. Let's make it welcoming. Let's make sure that people do feel like it's collaborative and you are trying to support them. So that's one thing. And then with another area that we see very often of having issues are the microaggressions that happen, because everyone learns ableism. Our world is ableist. We see very limited narratives about disability and entertainment and media and books. It's very common to hear ableist language and not question it. Phrases like falls on deaf ears, or saying things like, "Oh, this is so crazy." There are things that people use all the time that really need to be addressed and eliminated from language. With disability in particular, especially for a lot of people, they can feel like they are dismissed or minimized when they share about their disability, when they are getting the courage to talk about their access needs. And that is very damaging for disabled people. It can cause trauma in terms of their workplace experience. So when I think about ableism in the workplace, I really want to see companies focus on disability inclusion as a company-wide initiative that involves stakeholders at every level. We really need to make sure that managers are responding supportively to disability disclosure, that they are equipped with strategies for how to work with different types of disabled people and how to have conversations, because a lot of people are uncomfortable with talking about disability, and disability is not a bad word. So if we can go from the manager level all the way to the policies and practices that the employer has in place, where they can have accessibility built in to every project or every employee HR initiative, we would be seeing a different kind of workplace. But unfortunately, there are many companies that have made it clear that they are just not ready, or they don't care at this
And it's
point.
not a priority for them, yeah.
So we really need to see change, and I'm looking to activate the mindset in leaders and key decision makers, because we really need to have better workplaces for everyone.
I mean, here's the thing. You already knew I was going to be in complete agreement with what you were talking about, but I think you're absolutely right. And I very much appreciate you also including, like you had mentioned earlier, non-apparent disabilities. I live with bipolar disorder, and it's a big deal in my life, but it's also something that like, I sometimes hesitate to disclose because you want to feel that safety, right? You want to know that this vulnerability that you're sharing with someone is not going to be used against you, or is not going to be a reason to bar you from, any experience, any opportunity. And so, yeah, you're right. When it comes down to it, the role of the employer here is to not only make that employee, like support that employee so they can do their job, but also like make sure that employee understands you can tell us these things, right? Because otherwise, you can't expect a company to accommodate when they don't know what's needed, but it's on the company to make sure that what I'm trying to think of, a culture of trust is there. Trust and support is there for their employees. We only have 5 minutes left in our session, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more about your TEDx talk and how you help organizations to practice that disability inclusion. What would you like to tell us about that talk? I watched it twice. I thought it was fascinating. But what do you think is the heart of your message there?
Thank you for sharing your experience, Mike. And there's a lot of people that are going to relate to your story, and it's very powerful when we do share our stories. Unfortunately, people in the workplace are encountering so much discrimination and stigma, especially there's a lot of stigma around non-apparent disabilities. Let's consider even learning disabilities, where someone might not want to disclose a learning disability for then fear of being seen as less capable or less promotable. So in terms of my TEDx talk, it's called Creating Inclusive Workplaces for All. I appreciate that you watched it twice. I hope everyone watches it. I really, in 11 minutes, am trying to create an aha moment for everyone watching for why we need to focus on disability inclusion overall, whether or not you have employees disclosing. And so I take people through my own experience of going to an interview and what does that look like moment by moment to be a blind person showing up to an interview where I'm not going to tell them that I'm blind because I don't want to be discriminated against. And I was totally qualified for the role. So I tell my own story, and then I really make sure that everyone watching understands that if they're an employer, they have a lot of disabled employees they don't know about. And you can just assume that, create a better workplace, and it's not, there are simple best practices that anyone can implement. So I get people started with those 11 minutes. And then in terms of the work that I do overall in my business, as a public speaker, DEI consultant, and content creator, I'm working with companies on a regular basis to bring that disability awareness, inclusion, and accessibility knowledge to them. I offer trainings, workshops, fireside chats, and consulting to make sure that people are learning over time, that I meet them where they are. And I used to be an elementary school teacher, so teaching adults is not so different. I make everything interactive and engaging. I always share my story to make it relatable. And I share examples from disability overall so that people are learning from, about the broad spectrum of disability. So I love what I do. I love working with my clients. Some of them do one-time engagements with me, and some of them do packages where I have 6 months, a year, and I really love working deeply to create change.
That sounds amazing. I think, I absolutely encourage everybody watching out there to go check out Catarina's TEDx talk. It was very, very good. If there's anything that you like, if there's only one thing that our audience can take away from today's session, what do you want that to be?
I want everyone to know that disabled people are talented, powerful, and valuable.
Yes. Oof, loving that message. You're giving me goosebumps right now. So I just want to say, Catarina, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to speak with me. It has been really, really amazing to get to hear a little bit more about what you do and how workplaces can be more fully inclusive for all of our diverse populations. Thank you so much. Just cannot wait and hope we get to speak again later, on a new opportunity in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, that's going to round us out for this session, but thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned. There's another great chat and learn, there's another great session coming up. Thanks. All right, recording is going to end there. I'll probably have them shut off before I messed up my my outro. But I, again, just want to say a huge thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that everything worked out, that we got this recorded. And I appreciate your personal perspective on the topic. So I'm really happy that we were able to work this out in a pre-recorded way because, yes, I'm not going to be available on the actual date. So is everyone else going to be speaking live on the day?
Not everyone. We do actually end up with probably about 3. Well, it depends on how many days we're doing the summit. For like 2-day summits, we usually have at least 1 or 2 people that do a pre-recorded. For the 3 and 4-day summits, they're more frequent, especially as we started booking like not necessarily like bigger names, but people who have very full schedules right now. So right. Yeah, I mean, you're definitely not going to be the only one that's pre-recorded. But yeah, it'll be a lot of live speakers. And so we try and kind of feather those in between so that way people are able to interact with the speakers as well as get great content from people that aren't able to make it on the day of.
Okay, well, that's great. I'm glad to know that I'm not the only pre-recorded person, and
Not
I wish
at
you
all.
well with the summit, with the day, and I look forward to like staying in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Oh, you're welcome. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.